"Know your place, lady. This deck's for Marines." The words came half a second before the shoulder. Corporal Chase Duvall was already moving when he said them, already late, already cutting the corner of the parade deck at a dead jog, with his cover crooked and his blouse half squared. He did not slow. He did not look. He put his shoulder into the woman standing at the edge of the pavement and kept going, and she went down hard onto the concrete. 800 hours. The bugle climbed. To the colors rolled across the deck in clean brass notes, and every spine in the formation snapped straight, and every hand came up in salute, except the one already on the ground. She landed on her hip and her palm, and the grit bit into the heel of her hand. A younger person would have gasped. A civilian would have cried out, or cursed, or looked around for someone to blame. She did none of it. She rolled with the fall the way water rolls off stone, came up onto one knee, and stopped there. Squared, still, her eyes going forward, and up to the flag climbing the staff. She held the courtesy of colors from the ground. She did not know a single Marine on that deck. She held it anyway. The woman was 42. She wore a plain dark suit, the kind a mid-level consultant wears to a meeting she does not expect to enjoy, and a temporary visitor lanyard, with no rank on it, no unit, no entourage. To 500 Marines, she was nobody, a lost contractor, a wrong turn in business clothes. Duvall reached his squad and fell in, breathing hard, grinning at the near miss like it was a story he would tell at chow. He did not render honors to the woman he had knocked flat. He rendered them to the flag, because the flag was watching, and he had already decided she was not. 19-year-old Private First Class Elliot Park stood 2 files over. He saw her go down. Something in him lurched, and his boot came off its mark a half step, the instinct to help, to reach. And then a corporal's glare pinned him back into ranks, and he froze there, ashamed, saluting a flag, while a woman knelt, bleeding a little on the concrete 12 feet away. Up in the reviewing stand, on the raised platform, draped for the week's ceremonies, a man in the service uniform of a Marine general had stopped watching the colors. Major General Curtis Rhodes, 55, 2 silver stars on his collar, division commander, had come only to look the battalion over before its change of command. He had watched 10,000 formations. He knew what a body looked like when it was surprised by pain, and what a body looked like when it had been surprised by pain so many times that surprise had been trained out of it. He had just watched the second kind fall and recover on that deck. He said nothing. He filed it, the way old soldiers file things, and he kept his eyes on the woman in the plain suit long after everyone else had forgotten she existed. The last note of the bugle died. The flag reached the top of the staff and caught the wind and snapped out flat. The formation held its salute for the beat and dropped it as one. She rose. Not fast. Not slow. She rose the way a person rises who has decided exactly how she wants to look while doing it, and she brushed the grit from her palm with 2 fingers, and the hand she brushed was calloused across the pads in a line that a firing grip leaves, and an office does not. A lance corporal near the edge muttered without turning his head. "You okay?" "Fine," she said. One word. Flat. Nothing wasted. She glanced at her watch, which she wore with the face turned inward toward her wrist, the way people wear a watch when they do not want light bouncing off the crystal at the wrong moment. Then she looked out across the deck, and her eyes did not go to the faces first. They went to the exits, the gate, the gap between the headquarters building and the armory, the road the trucks would use. She read the deck the way you read a room you might one day have to leave in a hurry. Sergeant Major Hector Alvarado, 51, standing near the base of the reviewing stand, watched her do it. He was the battalion sergeant major. He had spent 30 years learning to read Marines, and what he read now made the hair on his forearms lift. That was not how a lost contractor stood on a strange deck. That was how a predator stood in a field it was measuring. "That's not a civilian," he said. Quiet. To no one at all. She turned toward the headquarters building and began to walk, unhurried, her steps falling at an even count. And every Marine who looked at her saw a woman who had gotten what she had coming. Only 2 men on that deck were watching her leave and feeling something colder than that, and neither of them yet knew her name. The formation broke into its parts. Squads peeled off toward the armory and the motor pool and the chow hall, and the story of the morning was already moving faster than any of them. The lady who forgot whose deck it was, who walked into a formation like she owned it and got dropped for her trouble. Nobody stopped to ask why the general had watched her go. A staff sergeant and Corporal Duval broke off from the pack and angled to intercept the woman before she reached the headquarters doors. The staff sergeant did the talking. Duval stood behind him with his thumbs hooked in his belt and the grin still writing his mouth, enjoying the second act of a thing he thought had ended. "Ma'am, this is a restricted area during colors," the staff sergeant said. "You can't just walk onto a formation." Kessler stopped. She looked at him. She straightened the visitor lanyard against her chest with one finger, an ordinary gesture, and she answered the way she answered everything. "Understood." The staff sergeant waited for more. There was no more. It unbalanced him a little, the way a punch thrown at empty air unbalances a man. "You want to tell me what you're doing out here?" He tried again. "Watching," she said. "Watching what?" "Colors ran 90 seconds late," she said. "Road guard was short, 1 on the north side. You had a fire watch gap between 0600 and 0640 by your own duty log, if the log's honest. Your dress-right dress bowed in the 3rd rank. Somebody skipped the police call along the curb. There's brass by the drain." Every sentence was flat and short and correct, and each one landed like a small stone dropped into still water. The staff sergeant's mouth opened and did not immediately produce anything. Marines did not talk like that unless they had stood 1,000 formations and run 100 of them. Contractors did not talk like that at all. Duval's grin slipped a 1/4 inch. "How would you know our duty log?" She looked at him for the first time. It was not a hostile look. It was worse than that. It was the flat, unbothered assessment of someone deciding how much of a problem you were going to be, and concluding, "Not much." "Guessed," she said, which was a lie, and all 3 of them knew it was a lie, and none of them could say why. Sergeant Major Alvarado had drifted close enough to hear. He said nothing. He watched her hands, which were still. He watched her weight, which was balanced evenly on both feet, the way a fighter stands and a bystander does not. He noted the watch worn face inward. He noted that she carried no bag, no phone in her hand, no identification of her own beyond the loaner lanyard. Sterile. The word for it came up out of his memory, unbidden. Sterile. The way a man goes out the wire when he does not want anything on him that can be read if it goes wrong. He had met people who moved like that exactly twice in his career. The first had been a warrant officer, a quiet man who ran a reconnaissance element and wore his watch face inward and answered questions in single syllables, and who had turned out to have a chest full of ribbons nobody on the base had ever seen because he never wore them. The second had been a woman, years ago, a name he had only ever heard on a radio in the worst night of his life. He tried to remember what had been true about both of them, and the answer surfaced and made his stomach tighten. Both of them had been the most dangerous people on any deck they stood on, and both of them had looked, to the untrained eye, like exactly no one at all. That was the whole trick of it, he thought. The loud ones told you what they were. The quiet ones let you find out. "Sergeant Major," Duval said, seeing him, expecting backup. This civilian walked into colors. Alvarado did not take his eyes off her. "Did she?" he said. It was not a question. He was giving her a chance to fill the silence, to explain herself, to do the thing every civilian did when a sergeant major looked at them. Talk. She did not talk. She let the silence sit, comfortable in it, and she checked her watch once, timing something, and Alvarado understood with a slow, cold certainty that she was not waiting to be dismissed. She was waiting for something on a schedule he could not see. From 20 feet off, First Sergeant Roy Maddox came across the deck like weather. 46, barrel through the chest, first sergeant of the offending company, and he had built his corner of this battalion in his own image. Hard, closed, contemptuous of anyone who had not earned the right to stand on his deck. Outsiders were a tax on his time. This one had cost him a clean colors. "What is this?" Maddox said. Not to her, to his Marines, to the deck. "Lost civilian first sergeant," the staff sergeant said, recovering. Wandered into the formation. Maddox looked at Kessler the way he looked at a discrepancy on a duty roster. "You're done out here," he said. "Somebody walk her to the visitor center and off my deck. She's nobody. Nobodies don't get to slow my battalion down." Kessler held his gaze for one beat. Then she nodded, mild, and let herself be turned toward the headquarters building, and she walked away at that same even count, timed to the minute. Alvarado watched her go, and the certainty settled into him like cold water into a boot. The battalion had just made a mistake it could not yet see. By noon, the story had grown legs and a punchline. It moved through the barracks and the chow line and the smoke pit, the way all good barracks stories move. A little bigger at each stop, a little crueler. The truth sanded off the edges until only the laugh was left. The lady who forgot whose deck it was. The lady who tried to walk into colors like she owned the place and got introduced to the concrete. Duval told it best because Duval had been there, and in his telling, he grew from the man who ran her over into the man who put the intruder in her place. Someone gave her a nickname. The nickname stuck because nicknames are the cheapest way a group has of agreeing that a person does not matter. That was the quiet violence of it, the thing worse than the shoulder on the concrete. A body heals in a day, but a whole company deciding together, over trays and cigarettes, that a person was a joke, that was a thing that took root. Junior Marines who had felt the half-step of instinct to help her that morning learned by lunch that the safe thing, the belonging thing, was to laugh instead. That was how a climate spread, not by order, by laughter, passed hand to hand, until cruelty felt like membership and decency felt like risk. Kessler spent the middle of the day in a lobby. Her sponsor was in a meeting. Then the sponsor was tied up. Then the sponsor was a name on a door that did not open. She sat in a hard chair against the wall of the headquarters foyer, and she did not fidget, and she did not check the desk clock every 2 minutes the way waiting people do. She took out a small notebook, the cheap kind with a rubber band around it, and she wrote. She wrote times. She wrote names, first initials, and last, in a small, even hand. She wrote the gap, the distance between what this battalion said about itself on the plaques in its own lobby and what it had done on its own deck at 800 hours that morning. She wrote the fire watch gap and the short road guard and the brass by the drain. She wrote the way a corporal had knocked a stranger flat and kept moving, and the way a first sergeant had looked at the stranger on the ground and seen a scheduling problem. She was patient the way stone is patient. She sat in the chair the enemy had put her in, and she catalogued the enemy. And the enemy walked past her all afternoon and saw a nobody in a plain suit and felt nothing at all. She had learned patience the hard way, in places where impatience got people killed. A younger officer, an angry one, would have flashed the rank by now, would have made a phone call, would have watched the whole battalion snap upright and known the sour, small pleasure of it. She had done none of that on purpose. Rank flashed early tells you nothing. Rank withheld tells you everything. Who helps the nobody? Who steps over her? Who builds a wall to bury her? She had flown in a day early and worn a plain suit precisely to buy this afternoon in the hard chair, and every cruelty that walked past her was a page in a report she had not yet decided how to write. The battalion thought it was ignoring a contractor. It was, in fact, being inspected down to the studs by the one person in the building qualified to condemn it. Park found her at 1500. He almost did not. He walked the long way around the foyer to avoid her, ashamed of the half-step he had taken, and then not taken that morning. And then he made himself turn around and come back. He stopped in front of her with his cover in his hands. "Ma'am," he said, "about this morning. I'm sorry. That wasn't right. What happened to you wasn't right." She looked up from the notebook. For a moment, the flat assessment softened into something almost warm. The look an instructor gives a young Marine who has just done the harder thing instead of the easier one. "Not your fault," she said. "Carry on." 3 words and a look, and the boy stood an inch taller. He did not get to enjoy it. Maddox came around the corner and saw one of his junior Marines talking to the civilian problem, and his voice cracked across the foyer like a rifle bolt. "Park, what are you doing?" Not a question either. "Get away from the contractor and get back to your section. We don't fraternize with people who don't belong here." Park went. He looked back once. Kessler had already returned to her notebook, calm, writing, and she did not look up. And that steadiness was its own kind of message. "It is all right. I have this. You will understand later." Maddox stood over her a moment. She was, he had decided, a liability now. A loose civilian with a grievance and a notebook. The kind of thing that turns into a complaint, an inspector, a bad afternoon in the colonel's office. So Maddox began, quietly, to build the thing that men like Maddox always build. Not a defense. A story. A version in which the civilian was the aggressor, in which she had walked into the formation, made a scene, put hands on his Marine, and gotten only what any intruder gets. He walked off to find the people who would sign it. Kessler underlined a single line in the notebook. She looked at it for a moment. Then she closed the cover and slid the rubber band back over it. If watching the wrong person get quietly written off makes something tighten in your chest, if you have ever been the nobody in the hard chair while people who should have known better walked past, then that feeling is the whole reason this channel exists. Stay in ranks with us. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stay to see exactly who they knocked down this morning. Maddox built his paper the way a careful man builds a wall, one signed brick at a time. He found the staff sergeant first, then a lance corporal who had been near the front rank, and he did not tell them what to write, so much as he told them what they had seen. She came in fast, Maddox said, right into the formation. Duval was holding his line and she walked into him. She made a scene when she went down. That's what you saw. He said it the way a senior man says a thing to junior men, not as a request, as a correction of their faulty memory. And memory, in the presence of a first sergeant, is a soft and obedient animal. By the time the statement was drafted, it read cleanly. An unescorted civilian had entered a military formation, collided with a service member, and created a disturbance. It was a good wall. It had only one flaw, which Maddox could not see, because he had built it to face the wrong direction. He had done this before, though he would never have called it that. There had been a mess specialist 8 months back who had complained about the way Duval's squad ran the chow line, and there had been a civilian instructor before that who had written up a safety gap in the armory. Both times the paper had flowed the same way. Statements gathered, memories corrected. The complaint turned quietly back on the complainer until the complainer decided it was easier to stop. It had always worked. Maddox had come to believe it always would, because he had confused a run of easy targets with a law of nature. He had never once had to build a wall against someone who had walked out of a collapsing perimeter, carrying 2 Marines, and he did not know how to imagine one. So he built the same wall he always built, out of the same bricks, and he faced it the same direction, at the one person in 15 years it could not hold. They pulled her lanyard for review. A corporal came to the foyer and asked her, not quite meeting her eyes, to surrender the visitor badge and wait in a room down the hall while her access was looked into. On paper, she was no longer a guest. On paper, she was a security matter. "Understood," she said, and handed over the lanyard, and walked to the bare room and sat. It was a small room with a table and 2 chairs, and a clock on the wall that ran 90 seconds fast. She noted the 90 seconds. She noted the door, which opened inward, and the second door behind her, a supply closet, which did not lock. She timed the footsteps in the hall, the interval between passes, the rhythm of the building. She was not planning an escape. She was doing what she had always done, in every strange room, in every strange country. She was making the room hers by knowing it better than the people who owned it. Down the corridor, Sergeant Major Alvarado stood at the duty desk and asked, mildly, to see the colors footage from that morning. He told himself it was routine. The general was on base for a review. The sergeant major liked to have his facts straight before the general asked for them. That was the reason he gave. The real reason sat in his gut, like a swallowed stone. He watched the footage in the duty office with the door shut. He watched the corporal cut the corner. He watched the shoulder go in. He watched the woman fall. And then he watched her recover. And he leaned toward the screen and watched it again. And a third time. The roll. The squared knee. The eyes going forward to the flag while she was still down. Nobody trained a civilian to render the courtesy of colors from the ground with grit in her palm. Nobody trained it into most Marines. He had seen that exact economy, fall, absorb, recover, orient, in exactly one kind of person, and that kind of person didn't carry visitor lanyards. Then he pulled the duty log Maddox's statement leaned on, and he read the fire watch line, and he read the times, and he set the log next to the footage in his head, and saw that the two did not fit. The statement said she walked into the formation. The footage said the corporal walked into her. Alvarado sat back in the chair and did not move for a while. He did the honest thing before he did the smart thing, which was always his failing and his saving grace. He went and found the woman himself. He brought her a paper cup of coffee she had not asked for and set it on the table in the bare room and sat down across from her. And he studied her the way she had studied the deck. "You've been on a lot of bases," he said. "Not a question." "Some," she said. "You called the fire watch gap before you'd have had time to read a log." He turned his cup a quarter turn on the table. "That's a battalion I know. 2nd of the 7th. You ever work with them?" It was a small trap, a term of art with a wrong detail folded into it. The kind of thing only someone who had truly lived the life would catch and correct. "3rd," she said. Not, "I don't know." Not, "maybe." Just the correction. Flat. Offered without weight. And it was the correct one. And Alvarado felt the last of his doubt go out of him like breath. He had met 2 people in 30 years who moved the way she moved, and answered the way she answered, and wore the watch the way she wore it. Both of them had a Navy Cross. He had helped carry the casket of one of them. He stood. He did not salute. He did not yet have the right, did not have the proof, could not act above his lane on a feeling. But he inclined his head half an inch, an old man's courtesy, and she saw it, and something passed between them that neither of them said out loud. Then he went to find Maddox. "Pull the statement," Alvarado said. Low, in the corner of the company office. Pull it today. Maddox laughed. It's a clean statement, Sergeant Major. 3 signatures. I've watched the footage. The corporal ran her down. Your statement says the opposite of a video the general can pull up on his phone. Alvarado's voice dropped further, went flat and hard as a range command. If she is who I think she isn't, this ends careers. Yours first. Pull it. She's a contractor, Sergeant Major. Maddox squared his shoulders, too far in to turn around. A man who had signed too many bricks into the wall to admit the wall faced the wrong way. Stand down. Alvarado looked at him a long moment. Then he walked out, because there was nothing left to say to a man who had decided not to hear it, and he went and looked at the next morning's schedule pinned to the board. Reviewing officer, the division commanding general. Event, battalion review, full formation on the deck. 0800. Every Marine in this battalion would be standing at attention tomorrow morning. And the reason for it was sitting right now in a bare room with a paper cup of coffee going cold. Subscribe and be there when it turns. It is going to turn on that deck. Night came down over the base, and in the visiting officers' quarters, in a small room she had signed for under her own name, the name no one on the deck had bothered to ask. The woman they called a contractor became someone else. She laid the uniform out on the bed first. She did it slowly, the way you handle a thing that has cost you. Marine Corps dress blues, the dark coat, the sky blue trousers with the blood stripe down the seam, the white cover set at the head of the bed. She squared the coat on the blanket and ran her thumb once along the ribbon bar above the left breast, and the ribbons told the story the lanyard had hidden. Among them, at the top, was a ribbon the color of a winter sky, the Navy Cross. Second only to the Medal of Honor. There is exactly one way to earn it, and it is not in an office. She stood over it in the dark, and for the first time all day, alone where no one could see, she let herself go back. 2011. She was 27 then, a captain, a rifle company commander, at an outpost stuck on a ridgeline in a country that ate outposts. The night it happened, the wire came apart at 0300 to a volume of fire that turned the dark solid. The perimeter buckled on the north side. Marines went down in the first 2 minutes, and on the company net, holding the pieces of a company together with her voice, was a call sign a radio operator had given her the week before as a joke, and that stopped being a joke that night. Revenant. She had crossed 40 meters of open ground twice, once to reach 2 wounded Marines pinned at the collapsed north post, and once to drag the second of them back when the first carry went wrong. She had held the line at the gap with whoever she could pull to it until the relief birds came up over the ridge, with the dawn behind them. She had done the thing they wrote on the citation, the thing that got her, the ribbon the color of a winter sky. And she had lost Sergeant Wesley Caro doing it. Caro was 24. He had the north post when it went. He had put himself in the gap so the wounded could come out, and he had stayed in the gap while she carried them, and he had been talking on the net the whole time, calm, feeding her the picture until he was not. "Go, ma'am," he had said, the second to last thing. "I've got the gap." They called her Revenant because she went back into the fire and came out. Caro went into the gap and did not. She had gone to the funeral. She had stood in the wind at the edge of a grave and folded herself down small enough to say something to a mother who did not want to hear it from the officer who had lived when her son had not. She had learned that day that there is a kind of survival that feels exactly like a debt, and that you pay it not in grand gestures, but in the small, daily refusal to let the thing that killed him, carelessness, contempt, the treating of a Marine as a thing to be spent, take root anywhere you have authority. Caro had died holding a gap so that people could come out. She had spent 15 years holding gaps of a quieter kind, in units that had forgotten why the gap mattered. She had carried that arithmetic for 15 years, the 2 she saved and the 1 she did not. And it had made her the kind of officer who flew in a day early and stood at the edge of a strange deck in a plain suit to watch how a battalion treated the people it thought did not matter. Because that was where the truth of a unit lived, not on the plaques in the lobby, in how the corporal treated the nobody. She closed the uniform bag. She set the alarm and did not need it. She turned the watch face inward on the nightstand out of 30 years of habit and lay down in the dark, and she slept 4 hours by choice because that was how much she needed and no more. Across the base, in a folder in a company office, a signed statement waited under a cover sheet marked for the reviewing officer's morning in-brief. It was a good wall, 3 bricks strong. It was about to be walked into by the woman whose ribbon rested, that very moment, on a pressed blue coat in a dark room, the woman it had been built, in every careful line, to bury. Review morning came up clear and cold, 0740. The battalion formed on the deck again, sharper this time, because the general was watching. Guidon snapped. Covers aligned. The reviewing stand stood draped and waiting. Maddox saw her at 0751. She was at the edge of the deck. The same edge. The plain suit again, because the blue coat was for tomorrow, and a fresh visitor lanyard she had signed for at the gate at 0630, when the desk was too sleepy to make trouble. She stood exactly where a corporal had knocked her flat the morning before, and she was watching the formation with that same, still, measuring calm. Maddox felt something in his chest go tight and mean. The civilian problem was back, on review morning, with the general due in minutes. Every instinct he had built over 26 years told him the same thing. Make it disappear before the man with the stars sees it. "First Sergeant," he said to nobody, and then to 2 Marines nearest him, one of them Corporal Duval. "That civilian is back on my deck. Get her off, now, before the general's car." Duval grinned. He liked this order. He crossed the pavement with the other Marine, and he did not ask her to leave, because asking was for people who had not already decided they could take. He reached out and closed his hand around her upper arm and pulled. She let him. That was the thing Alvarado would remember afterward. The thing that told him everything. She could have stopped it. The way she was balanced. The way she was built under that plain suit. The callus on her hand. She could have put the corporal on the concrete in the time it takes to blink. She did not. She let him take her arm and wrench it. Let it happen in full view of the formation and the cameras running for the review. And she stood squared and unflinching while he did it. And her eyes went not to him but past him, to the gate, to the road the trucks used, to the staff car that had just turned in. Then she looked at Duval. For the first time, she looked directly at him. And she smiled. It was not a frightened smile or an angry one. It was calm, almost kind, the smile of a person who has just watched you sign your own name to something you cannot take back, and who is not going to warn you again because you have used up your warnings. There was a reason she let it happen, and it was not weakness, and it was not even patience anymore. It was evidence. A shove at colors could be argued into an accident. A first sergeant's careful statement could turn it into her fault. But a corporal ordered to lay hands on her in front of the formation, in front of the review cameras, on the morning the division commander arrived. That could not be argued into anything but what it was. She had spent 2 days letting the battalion show her exactly who it was willing to be to a nobody. Now she let it do the last thing, the undeniable thing, the thing that would hold up under a general's own eyes. "You should let go now," she said. Quiet, almost gentle. Duval's hand tightened instead. "Or what?" he said, playing to the 2 Marines watching, playing to the deck. "You'll write me up in your little book?" 19-year-old Elliot Park was in the second file. He had stayed silent the first morning, and it had eaten at him all day and all night. He did not stay silent now. "Corporal!" His voice cracked out across the deck. Too loud. Braking regulation. Not caring. "That's assault. Let her go." "That's assault." Heads turned. Alvarado was already moving, cutting across the deck at a pace that was not quite a run. And across the pavement, the staff car rolled to a stop at the edge of the formation, and its door opened, and the general got out. And Major General Curtis Rhodes wasn't looking at the formation, and he wasn't looking at the flag. He was looking straight at the woman a corporal had by the arm. Duval's hand was still locked on her arm when the general's voice hit the deck. "Stand down." It was not loud. Rhodes did not need loud. 30 years of command had put an edge on his ordinary speaking voice that cut through 500 Marines and a snapping wind and stopped every moving thing on that pavement where it stood. The deck went silent so fast, the silence had a sound. He crossed the pavement himself. A 2-star general does not walk to the edge of a formation to deal with a corporal and a civilian. There are 10 layers of people whose job that is. He walked anyway, past the frozen first sergeant, past the staff sergeant whose signature was on the wall, straight to the edge of the deck, where a woman in a plain suit stood with a corporal's hand, still clamped on her arm. He stopped in front of her, and Major General Curtis Rhodes, division commander, came to attention and rendered her a salute. "Lieutenant Colonel Kessler," he said. The name went through the deck like current through water. Then he said the other thing, lower, with a weight that made the older Marines' heads come up, because they knew what it meant when a general said a word like that in a voice like that. "Revenant. A beat. It is an honor, ma'am. It always was." Sergeant Major Alvarado's voice cracked across the deck like a round going off. "Attention on deck!" 500 Marines snapped to. The command rolled down the formation, present arms, and 500 hands came up in salute, not to the flag this time, to the woman at the edge of the deck, the nobody in the plain suit, the lady who forgot whose deck it was. Corporal Chase Duval's hand sprang open on its own. His face did the thing that faces do when the floor of the world drops out from under them. First the confusion, a frown, a half shake of the head, the animal refusal of a fact too large to fit. Then the disbelief as the pieces started to move. The general saluting, the sergeant major's voice, the word lieutenant colonel, the word revenant, and the plain suit that was not a plain suit anymore, but a cover, a test, a thing he had failed in front of the entire battalion and a 2-star general. Then recognition, cold and total. The woman he had knocked flat and mocked, and just now grabbed by the arm was a Navy Cross recipient, and the officer about to take command of everything he was. And then, last, the horror, as the full arithmetic of his morning arrived. The cameras, the witnesses, the general, the hand he had just had on her arm, and settled onto him like a collapsing roof. He stepped back into a deck that was saluting her, and there was nowhere in it to hide. Kessler had not moved through any of it. She stood squared, unhurried, the grit of yesterday long gone from her palm, and she let the salute be held the regulation beat before she returned it, clean and correct, to the general and to the battalion at once. "General Rhodes," she said. "Good to see you, sir." "I served under you for one night in 2011, Colonel," Rhodes said, quiet enough that it was almost only for her, though the front ranks heard it and would carry it to the rest by noon. "I have not forgotten a minute of it. Nobody who was on that ridge has." He turned then, and the warmth went out of him, and what was left was the thing that had made him a general. "Sergeant Major," he said, "you have a corporal who just committed an assault on a Marine officer, on camera, in front of a division commander, at morning review. You have a first sergeant who ordered it. And I am told there is a statement in a folder somewhere in this battalion that says the officer on the ground did it to herself." His eyes found Maddox, who had not moved, whose face had gone the gray of old concrete. "We are going to do every part of this by the book, starting now." The base guard was already at the edge of the deck. Duval did not resist. There was nothing left in him to resist with. They took him by each arm, properly this time, lawfully, and walked him off the pavement he had owned 2 mornings running, and the formation held its salute to the woman at the edge until the general lowered his own. The statement in the folder, "The good wall, 3 bricks strong," was no longer a defense. Against a running video and a general's own eyes, it had become something far worse for the men who signed it. Evidence that they had known and lied and tried to bury a Navy Cross recipient under a corporal's word. The hand that had knocked her flat had opened on its own, and the whole deck had come to attention around the one man who could no longer hide inside it. The only 2 people on that pavement not standing tall were the corporal in the guard's grip and the first sergeant who had built him. The rest came fast, the way these things come once the first stone moves. The review did not stop the reckoning. It became the reckoning. Rhodes did not need a week of inquiry to know what he had seen with his own eyes, but the Corps runs on process, so process ran. The colors footage from both mornings, the running review cameras, the duty logs, and Alvarado's account laid side by side collapsed Maddox's version in under a day. The statement that said Kessler walked into the formation sat next to a video of a corporal running her down, and the gap between them was not a discrepancy. It was a crime. Corporal Chase Duval was placed in pre-trial confinement, pending court-martial for assault. 2 assaults, on 2 mornings, on a commissioned officer, though he had believed both times he was only shoving a nobody. That was the whole point, Rhodes would say later. In the quiet way he said the things that mattered. It was never about who she was. It was about who Duval was willing to be to someone he thought was no one. First Sergeant Roy Maddox was relieved on the spot. Not reassigned. Relieved, the word that ends the part of a career that matters, and referred to the Inspector General for the falsified statement, and for the culture the investigation would spend the next 2 months documenting. The contempt for outsiders, the nobodies who did not rate courtesy, the barracks that had learned from the top down that cruelty was a kind of competence. The Inspector General's team, when it came, pulled more than the colors footage. It pulled 8 months of complaints that had gone quiet, and it found the mess specialist and the civilian instructor and the pattern that connected them, and it found that the thing that had happened at Colors was not an accident of one bad morning, but the natural harvest of a garden Maddox had tended for years. 2 more statements were reopened, 3 more careers were adjusted. The word that came up again and again in the findings was climate. The invisible weather of a unit, the thing that decides whether a Marine reaches for a stranger who has fallen or steps over her. And the finding was that the climate of this company had been poisoned deliberately, one small permission to be cruel at a time. His wall had faced the wrong direction because he had built it in a battalion that had forgotten the only rule that finally counts. And Elliot Park, the 19-year-old private first class, who had broken his bearing to reach for a stranger, and then broken regulation to call an assault by its name on review morning in front of a general, Park was not forgotten either. Kessler found him herself the day after she took command. She knew his name without asking. She had written it in a small notebook 2 mornings before, first initial and last in a small, even hand, in the column of the people who had done right. Private First Class Park, she said. He came to attention so fast he nearly hurt himself. You reached for me at Colors. Then you stayed silent, and it ate you. And the next morning you didn't. She let that sit. The whole battalion watched a corporal put hands on me and stayed in ranks. You're the one who said the word. Remember that the day they offer you stripes for going along instead." "Yes, ma'am," Park managed. "Carry on," she said, and the boy walked away 6 inches taller than he had come, and he would stay in the Corps 11 years on the strength of that one sentence. If watching the right person finally get the salute she earned lands in you the way it should, if you have ever been the one who reached or the one who wished you had, then that is the whole reason this channel exists. Subscribe to Honor Tales and stand your watch with us. 2 days after a corporal knocked her flat, Lieutenant Colonel Nora Kessler took command of the battalion at the same flagstaff, on the same deck. She wore the dress blues this time, the dark coat, the blood-striped trousers, the white cover squared exactly, and on her chest, at the top of the bar, the ribbon the color of a winter sky, where 500 Marines could finally see it. She stood where the pavement met the grass, the exact square of concrete where she had come up on one knee with grit in her palm and held the courtesy of colors as a nobody. And she took the colors of the battalion into her hands as its commander. There was no gloating in it. There is never gloating in the ones who have actually paid. She received the colors, and she faced the battalion, and she said the short, true thing she had come to say, and the deck that had written her off 2 mornings before stood at attention and meant it. Sergeant Major Alvarado stood at her right hand, where the sergeant major stands, and he thought about the 2 people he had known who moved the way she moved, and for the first time in 15 years, the arithmetic of it did not only hurt. He had spent a career learning that the loud ones tell you what they are and the quiet ones let you find out. This time, he had found out in time to stand beside her instead of over her, and that, he decided, was the closest thing to grace a sergeant major ever gets. That night, in the commander's quarters, her phone lit in the dark. She was not asleep. She was rarely asleep at that hour. She picked it up, and she read the message on the screen, and she went very still. The old stillness, the deck-edge stillness, the stillness of a body that has been surprised by pain so many times that surprise has been trained out of it. It was a string of characters that meant nothing to anyone in the world but her. A recognition code, a call sign inside a call sign, and then, under it, in plain words, Revenant. Actual. He's alive. Sahel, come back for us. She read it 3 times. She thought about a gap on a ridgeline in 2011, and a sergeant named Wesley Caro, who had said, "I've got the gap," and had not come out, and a casket she had helped carry, and a name she had buried for 15 years. He's alive. She set the phone down. She turned the watch on the nightstand, face inward, out of 30 years of habit. And Lieutenant Colonel Nora Kessler, call sign Revenant, the woman a corporal had knocked flat at morning colors, sat awake in the dark and did not sleep at all, looking at a single word glowing on a screen, and at a country a very long way from this deck. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.